Howdy everyone, this is Dave, and there's a low-key Disney villain that I want to talk about. This video will cover Edgar Balthazar from Disney's 20th animated feature film, The Aristocats. Not to be confused with The Aristocrats by Gilbert Gottfried. This movie came out in 1970 and saw its first VHS release in 1996, then another release in the year 2000, which is where I first saw it. Want to know something crazy? The same 30-year difference between when The Aristocats came out and Y2K is the exact same as The Lion King and the year that this video was made. If you were hype about The Lion King when it originally came out, then this is a reminder that you need to take some pain relievers for your back, and put an F in the comments while you're at it. The Aristocats was based on a true story about a Parisian family of cats, and was adapted from a story by Tom McGowan and Tom Rowe. This also just so happened to be the last animated feature to be approved by Walt Disney himself prior to his death. That means that this was also the first feature to be completed and released after the fact. It has been said that you can tell how essential Walt was to creating such animated feats, and how significant the gap was that he left behind. This movie came out in a different era, so there are some things in there that wouldn't be tolerated nowadays. And you may not even know most of the voice actors, except for a few. And that's not even by name, just by recognizing their voices from other things. It's interesting when you start looking into these people, because when you see their birth and death dates, you realize that some of them were born while it was still the Wild West. Or at the very least, they were raised in a time where legendary cowboys and gunslingers were still alive. Red Dead vibes. It's even more impressive when some of these people are still alive. It always throws me off. Everyone, including myself, was rooting for Betty White, but Angela Lansbury was not far behind, passing at age 96. As of the creating of this video, Mel Brooks is still alive at age 98, and Dick Van Dyke will be 100 in 2025. I don't care how old he is or what anyone says. Dick Van Dyke returning for a Diagnosis Murder reboot is exactly what I need in my life. Edgar is voiced by Roddy Maud Roxby. This character is a loyal butler to retired opera singer, Madame Adelaide Bonfamille, voiced by Hermione Baddeley. Edgar comes off as a very butlerly fellow that does typical butler-esque things. Very proper, polite, and cultured. Nonetheless, he is not a very strong antagonist. In fact, he wouldn't even be considered a villain at all if it weren't for his greediness and impatience. Thus, he doesn't have any strength or abilities. He does, however, have a severe lack in experience to perform wrongdoings, leave minimal residual presence behind while doing so, and most importantly, get away unscathed. Since he isn't a downright evil scumbag, he appears to obtain some sort of moral compass when it comes to executing his mission, which in due course results in his downfall. Because if he was capable of offing things like other villains can, then this would have been wrapped up real quick. The flick opens in Paris, year 1910. We are introduced to Madame Adelaide, her cat Duchess, voiced by Eva Gabor, her kittens Burlois, Toulouse, and Marie, as well as noble butler Edgar and noble steed Frou Frou. All appears to be going well and everyone is happy. That is until the Madame's lawyer, Georges, rolls up in one of those fancy automobiles. He drives very safe, despite being an extreme liability while on foot. This guy's a lot of fun. He's hip to new technology and music. He is ancient, but his mind is still sharp enough to be trusted with people's affairs. Edgar has a horrific sequence of events transpire trying to get Georges safely up the stairs, which leaves him disheveled and out of breath while announcing his entrance to the Madame. They've known each other for a good chunk of their lives at this point, and after reminiscing about old times, they get down to business, creating her will. The Madame has no living relatives, and wishes to have her cats taken care of first and foremost after she passes. She trusts nobody but Edgar to do so, which is valid, because that's what he's doing now anyways. After the cats live out their lives and pass away, her vast wealth, including stocks, bonds, treasures, jewels, her mansion, country chateau, everything she owns would revert to Edgar. I don't know about you, but that sounds like an unbelievable deal if you ask me. Let's say Edgar is in his 40s. He would age into an early retirement smashingly, once all the cats had passed on. Plus, it's not even like cats require a lot of maintenance anyways. He would still be able to live out a life of leisure even with the cats inheriting first. They would just become his pets. The cats aren't like in charge or anything. At the end of the day, they just need to be loved and looked after by someone who is loyal and trustworthy. As long as the cat's needs are met, then who cares what he does? Anyone would agree that this would be like hitting the jackpot and the best outcome for Edgar, who is not a world-known opera singer and did not earn that money. Being a butler, helping this extremely wealthy woman live her best life, and in return she hooks him up so he can live his best life. This is a deal you can't mess up. Can you? Edgar can. And he doesn't see any of it that way. He overhears this as he is dropping some eaves on the conversation through a pipe that connects the rooms. His reaction is to have a melty about the cats being put before him on paper. She literally says that everything is going to Edgar after they die, and he doesn't hear it. It's like he had to reboot during the time that she said it.
I simply wish to have the cats inherit first. Then, at the end of their lifespan, my entire estate will revert to Edgar.
Cats inherit first.
He's acting like it's going to take forever for the cats to die because he adds each cat's life consecutively, and he also factors in that cats have 9 lives each. He gets bummed out that he will be dead by the time he will receive the inheritance, without considering that the cats and 9 lives thing doesn't exactly work like that. And the kittens were all from the same litter, so it's going to be around the same time frame for all of them when they die, and some may even die sooner than others. Madame Adelaide appears to still be in good health. She could possibly outlive the cats anyways. Most illogical. That's why it's good to have at least one person in your life that you can talk to, so you can gauge a third-person perspective on if what you're feeling is well-founded, or if you're just being a dumbass. Imagine if Edgar confided in one of his butler friends over a pint.
Edgar, old boy, I do say that your current position is unequivocally bussing, old chap. Howbeit, I will call cap on this drivel and not entertain the thought by informing you herewith that even conceiving such a noxious line of thought as to undergo this absurd catnapping plot is to admit that you are without doubt astronomically bonkers, my lad. My employer has 5 greedy, bratty children that are all on track to split the inheritance, and I will be lucky if one of them takes me in once he and the missus die. I wiped their bums, and that is how they will repay me. Those cunts!
I would imagine he would have a reality check before he even began his course of action. If he wouldn't have known, then nothing would have changed. He would have continued to faithfully buttle around without changing in any way. It's only upon finding out about the will that sends him spiraling. He comes to the conclusion that those cats have got to go. The next scene, we see interaction between Duchess and the kittens, and establish that they trust Edgar. The kittens are fancy, so they perform activities like painting and music lessons.
Yeah. It's Edgar. Yeah, old Pickle was Edgar. Old Pickle was.
Meanwhile, Edgar is preparing a concoction called Creme de la Creme à la Edgar, which includes an entire bottle of sleeping tablets that is more likely to put them in the type of sleep they won't wake up from, and a metric shit ton of vanilla. Edgar enters the room, places the bowls on the floor, and the cats start lapping it up. As he leaves the room, he says,
Sleep well? I mean, eat well, of course.
"Yeah, smooth move, man." Even though he's already messed up by initially thinking to do this in the first place, he can't even get past an objective without slipping up. A foreshadowing of things to come. A mouse that lives on the wall, named Roquefort, approaches them. He's voiced by Sterling Holloway, the guy who did Winnie the Pooh, Kaa, and the Cheshire Cat, among many other things. They're friends and allow him to partake in the sleep soup. The medication reacts quickly, and before long, Edgar is sneaking out of the house, a baby basket in hand, with the cats inside. He places them in the sidecar of his motorcycle, launch pad style. It doesn't take long for him to drive past the police station for things to totally unravel. He almost Bill Sykes himself by driving down the stairs to the metro. He's able to pull it together and makes his way to the countryside, where he plans on abandoning the cats because he can't bring himself to get his hands dirty. This is the best idea he could come up with to yield the desired outcome. He drives past a farm where two dogs hear him coming from a mile away. Lafayette, voiced by George Lindsay, and Pat Buttram as Napoleon. You recognize him for sure as Chief in The Fox and the Hound and the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood. In fact, he has a crazy power dynamic thing going on with George Lindsay and Robin Hood as well. Honorable mentions. He's also this possum guy in a Goofy movie, and a guy in the saloon in Back to the Future 3. Napoleon uses his supersonic canine ears to perfectly describe the motorcycle, noting the two-cylinder engine, chain drive, and a squeaky wheel in the front. He and Lafayette launch an attack on an unsuspecting Edgar, who has the most human reaction to the situation, by immediately needing a change of pants. There's a reason Rue and I don't do dog parks or meetups. In the last decade, both he and I have had at least 4 traumatizing experiences, and that's probably a low number because multiple instances have happened with the same dogs. The problems mostly stem from the same breed, but with any given dog, it could be on site. Ruger is gigantic, so there's a lot of contenders for a blood sport tournament that he did not sign up for, and they all want a piece of him. And look at his face. He is never looking for the smoke. That dude just wants to be sweet, hang out, and eat treats. And he doesn't want to hang out with any ratchet dogs. I get that these hounds are out in the country and are protecting the land, but it's still not fun trying to be a passerby who's just trying to get by safely, and every time you gotta deal with this. Edgar predictably loses control and swerves down the embankment. Napoleon and Lafayette continue to give chase. This movie is subject to a lot more cartoon physics than we see in other animated films. It's thanks to this cartoon buffoonery that the dogs wind up in the sidecar. Edgar flips out and presents his ass to them. And Napo's like, "Don't mind if I do," and obliges by getting a big mouthful of that thing. Also, the handlebars are spinning, and the bike is not crashing. But in the heat of the moment, you don't think about it, because Napoleon chomps down on Edgar's cheeks again. In the exact same spot, too. That's gotta hurt. A lot more wacky and zany happenings take place throughout this scene, and I don't feel like explaining all of it, but basically it has to do with a windmill, the motorcycle and sidecar separating, a couple of times Edgar is in the air with his umbrella, his shoes slip off, and of course his suspenders have to come into play. Those are by far the bane of his existence. Edgar makes his getaway by driving into the stone windmill, and not only physically moving it, but breaking through, and it's still functioning, allowing him to ride away. His onion butt gets bitten no less than 3 times, and 2 of them result in confirmed ripping and tearing of trow.
The ripping and the tearing, the ripping and the tearing.
We already see way too much of this grown man's underwear as it is, but we gotta think about seeing his bare ass too? Thankfully we don't, because a part of the rules of the cartoon silliness is that his pants and shoes regenerate. Edgar completely f***ed up the entire operation. Not one thing has gone right for him. He not only failed to go far enough to assure the cats wouldn't be able to return, but he almost got himself mauled to death. And he left a bunch of evidence behind, like his hat, umbrella, the sidecar to his motorcycle, and the basket that he had the cats in. He also can't be staying up too late because he is a butler after all, and they're expected to show up and have things done. I can imagine a lot of them starting their day extremely early, because if you're too busy getting someone else's shit done, then when do you have time for your own? This sounds stressful, and completely unnecessary. A storm rolls in, and Duchess and the kittens have to spend the rest of the night in the basket. Madame Adelaide awakens due to a nightmare about them, and immediately checks on her pets, to discover them gone. She runs through the house screaming, and Edgar is nowhere to be found, and it's never brought up or suspicious or anything. However, Roquefort hears the commotion, and takes initiative to try to find them. The next morning we are introduced to J. Thomas O'Malley, the Alley Cat, voiced by Phil Harris, who did Baloo in The Jungle Book and Little John in Robin Hood. O'Malley offers his services to help because naturally he wants to get into Duchess's pants. But he still assists after he finds out about the kids. He even saves one within 5 seconds of parting ways, and decides to escort them back to Paris. We see Madame Adelaide is devastated by the loss of her cats, and that Roquefort was not successful in finding them either. Everyone is feeling down except one person, and you already know who it is. He's not even trying to hide it. They never explained what happened when the Madame was awake screaming throughout the house, and Edgar was nowhere to be found because he was still heading back. If the cats are gone and he's nowhere to be found either, and returns alone looking like a disaster, I think that would make someone a little skeptical. No matter apparently, and it doesn't look incriminating at all as he joyfully enters the barn with a pep in his step singing. He boasts about his misdeeds by admitting to Frou Frou that he committed the catnapping, showing her the front page headline in the paper. Even though humans can't understand animals in this universe, animals can understand humans perfectly, and I think they can read. Because of this, Frou Frou and Roquefort are now aware of Edgar's plan as far as the catnapping is concerned. He continues to ramble about how the police think this was done by a professional, and that he did a masterful job. But he realizes that he left a smorgasbord of evidence behind at that farm. In order to remain in the clear, he needs to go back and get his things as soon as possible. As the cats journey onward, they come across some obstacles, and O'Malley is saved by 2 lady geese wearing bonnets. They are conveniently going to Paris too, and join the party on their travels. Once they get there, the geese meet up with a family member trying to escape with his life from a kitchen in a restaurant. His name is Uncle Waldo, and he is hammered because the chefs had marinated him in wine and tore his ass feathers out in order to prepare him for that evening's menu. The geese waddle off, while O'Malley takes the cats to the home of his friend, Scat Cat, played by Scatman Crothers. Which houses a bunch of groovy alley cat musicians. And they know how to get down! After they jam, Duchess and O'Malley hit it off on the rooftops. Edgar has to get his stuff back, and that night he enters the barn with a fishing pole, hops on the motorcycle, and heads back to the farm with the dogs. Roquefort attempts to hitch a ride in the motorcycle's broken taillight, but that is short-lived as he is flung into the stratosphere. It's kinda hard to stay on when Edgar's main driving strategy is very sporadic. He pops an over-the-top wheelie with his legs in the air, all man-spread, before he gets on the road. Don't ever let him know your next move. It's pretty amazing he can get away with driving like this, swerving in barely any control of the vehicle. The bike is probably jacked up from all the abuse inflicted on it, but it may be possible that he is out of practice riding without a sidecar. He arrives and finds the dogs have made themselves quite at home with this stuff. Napoleon is sleeping in the sidecar while he wears Edgar's hat, and has the open umbrella attached to the horn. Lafayette is in the baby basket. Of course, Edgar almost gives himself away with his squeaky shoes, but he removes them and approaches with his fishing line from the top of the haystack. It takes a couple attempts, but Edgar gets a good start by collecting his hat and the basket. Napoleon is awake and knows something is up, as Edgar beefs it and falls. I'm not sure what's happening here, but it's gotta be that cartoon logic. It appears that the dogs are somehow gyrating, moving all fast, and this constitutes pushing Edgar's body into the haystack, hiding him without them noticing he's there. Napoleon blames it on Lafayette. But once they notice they're missing a few of their items, they are on alert and on the hunt to get some of that Butler bubble butt. Lafayette accidentally steps into Edgar's shoes, and the squeak starts back up, causing hijinks. Edgar loads himself and the entire haystack into the sidecar, and balances that bitch on the one tire that is attached to one side. The hounds catch up to the one-wheeled haystack and jump in with furious anger. They collide with a wagon, sending the dogs and the haystack over, and they crash into a barn. They look on as Edgar makes his getaway, successfully stealing his stuff back, and reducing the amount of evidence that can be traced back to him. The next day, the cats have made it back home. Roquefort sees their approach, and excitedly leaves to share the news. As he runs by one of the rooms, he observes Edgar celebrating in the middle of the day, with a cigar and a bottle of champagne. Isn't he still on the clock? He says, "Get used to the finer things in life, and someday all of this will be yours." Okay, but not today. Madame Adelaide could walk in at any moment and see him smoking and getting sloshed, and propping his feet up on the piano. He could find himself reprimanded and immediately looking for another house to buddle that doesn't plan on leaving any wealth to him. Roquefort takes advantage of Edgar's sloppiness and ties his shoelaces together, before Edgar opens another bottle and he gets popped by the cork, crushing his rib cage and causing massive internal hemorrhaging. He sits there wondering where it all went wrong, as his body slowly bleeds out from the inside. Just kidding, it just knocks the wind out of him. The kittens begin meowing and scratching at the door, while Duchess and O'Malley say goodbye. Edgar promptly freaks out and gets up, but his tied laces keep him from moving forward. Roquefort tries to warn them to stay away, but it's no use. They are all captured in a sack, and Edgar throws them in an unlit oven. Madame Adelaide is home and comes running because she heard meowing, but is once again disappointed when she finds that her pets are not there. The cats tell Roquefort to get O'Malley. He does so, catching up with him outside. O'Malley tells Roquefort to go get Scat Cat and the other alley cats, which is not the best situation for a mouse to find himself, but he does it bravely and is able to explain that O'Malley sent him before he is eaten. At that point, Roquefort is a made man, and they all rush to help. O'Malley watches Edgar make a phone call, and then he takes the sack into the barn, where he locks the cats in a trunk that he plans to have sent to Timbuktu, which is over 2,000 miles away in Africa, with no food or water. As he is pushing the trunk outside for pickup, O'Malley springs into action, getting the drop on him and closing the door. Edgar makes a move, but is stopped by Frou Frou grabbing his jacket. He rips it away and opens the door. Frou Frou keeps Edgar from pushing the trunk any further. He goes after O'Malley with a sickle and chases him up a ladder, but O'Malley pushes them off and they crash to the ground below. Edgar grabs a pitchfork and begins jabbing at the hay and destroying the barn. At this point, I realize that he has finally resorted to taking life. If he had this commitment initially, he would be in a different situation. Edgar corners O'Malley and throws the pitchfork at him, like a spear, and for a second it looks like he got him. But O'Malley uses one of his 9 lives and escapes. Edgar opens the door yet again, and this time is greeted by all of the alley cats, who start tearing his ass up. Roquefort figures out the combination of the lock, but before they are released, Edgar makes one final stand, stating that they are going to Timbuktu if it's the last thing he ever does. One of the alley cats then unties a hay bale that was suspended, and it falls, crashing onto Edgar's head. He receives a concussion or some sort of head trauma from this, indicated by his eyes after the blow. But he's already in too deep, and there's no way to call a truce now. The cats throw a horse harness thingy around him, toss a bucket of water on his head, hook him up and pull him off the trunk, freeing Duchess and the kittens, and brought swinging toward Frou Frou, who winds up for a serious back kick, makes full contact, and launches Edgar into the trunk. A horse can kick the equivalent of 2,000 pounds at full force. This is more than enough pressure to break and fracture bones, cause immense swelling and bruising of soft tissue, and of course can be very, very lethal. A kick from a horse could even put someone into cardiac arrest. Back in high school, I had a teacher that boarded horses, and one year a horse kicked back, and the hoof barely grazed her forehead above her left eye. At first it wasn't a big deal, but then in no time a bunch of fluid drained down into her eye socket and gave her the gnarliest black eye that I have ever seen. It took like 6 months to a year to fully go away. You got to appreciate the size of these creatures, because it could go bad very quickly. We don't get to see too much of how Edgar takes to this punishment, because the trunk is quickly closed, locked, picked up, and thrown in the back of the truck that will start him on his long journey. Remember that Edgar just received severe head trauma and is restrained, with a bucket on his head, on his knees, cramped in that trunk, similar to the scavenger's daughter. That will not be opened until well after it shows up in Africa, with a smell emanating from it. Oh yeah, he is definitely dead. There's no way he survived. It would be an unsolved mystery too, because who would do this and why? Not to mention it's 1910, so there's no way they'll figure it out. At the end, O'Malley joins the family, and the will has to be altered because Edgar vanished, and Madame Adelaide has no idea where he went, forcing her to remove him from it. She even states that if Edgar had known about the will, then he would never have left. Instead, she's going to use her money to start a foundation to provide a home for all of the alley cats of Paris, which still doesn't solve her issue of finding a reliable person to take care of said cats. But whatever, if the movie doesn't care about it, then neither do I. The end. Edgar should have just stayed in his lane and not worry about taking advantage of his proprietress. She seems really cool to work for, and it looks like you can get away with a lot without her knowing or caring. He was perfectly fine with his lot in life and had no ill intention toward her or her cats. But once he found out about the will, he became irrational and made one mistake after another. You can see near the end that it all went to his head, resorting to day drinking on the job and not being very butlerly. His mindset was way off. I also personally think that he underwent a terrible end, as he suffered massive trauma, was restrained and trapped in a claustrophobic nightmare, where he writhed, hunched over on his knees in pain, confined to this small space until he succumbed to his injuries, or if he was lucky, ran out of air. This might be one of the most fucked up Disney deaths now that I think about it, and it's so low-key. You simply laugh at the man who got his butt kicked into a trunk, and then you don't think about what happens to him after that. Brutal! I don't know much about the storybook, but apparently in that, Madame Adelaide finds out what Edgar did to her cats, and he gets fired and written out of the will that way. Either option here sucks, but you can get fired multiple times, and you can only die once. So here it is Disney that is taking the violence to the next step from the original stories, and not the other way around. Alright everyone, that's all I've got for now. Was there something I missed? Let me know if I did. If you enjoy my content, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, have a good one.